Hello. Well, thank you, Professor Haig, and I'd also like to give a disclaimer as well. I'm also associated with Polar Research and Policy Initiative, on whose behalf I'm speaking here as well. So, to start off with, I'd really like to thank Mark as well for pronouncing my name properly as well, which is sometimes a bit of a mouthful. But if we start off with my work and some of the research I've been doing at PRPI, at also at UCL, it really deals with looking at sustainable Arctic shipping, and in this context with Scotland, but taking a bit of a wider approach with some of the great examples we saw previously by looking actually at the ship owners, but also kind of look at it from a more of a social policy perspective and wider research networks and wider combinations of business factors that might affect shipping and Scotland's role in it with connecting remote communities. So I guess there's 4 main points I would like to cover within the brief time I have here, and that's to do with maritime governance, with innovation and research clusters, shipbuilding and ship design, trade, sports, and finance. Now this is a lot to cover in 8 minutes, and I'm clearly not going to go into much detail, but what I'd like to emphasize is all of these 4 points, when you look at the wider story of connecting remote communities and working on shipping, are intrinsically connected. And we have to look at them as a combination of different factors and challenges in order to see what the different solutions to the problems of remote communities can be moving ahead. So to start off with governance and sustainable shipping, sorry, one second. There we go. So I guess from a governance perspective, we've seen over the past couple of years a growing concern of environmental concerns in shipping. This is a global issue, not just an Arctic issue, but an issue that's specifically strongly felt in the Arctic. Speaking to people from remote communities, you will see different types of concerns. Also from an environmental perspective of environmental hazards, such as sulfur and nitrogen oxide emissions or particulate matter emissions, but also from a global warming potential of shipping. Now this is a piece of work, the slide to your left is a piece of work done by a couple of colleagues of mine projecting what the role of shipping in GHG emissions in the future will be. And there are different scenarios, but what we can see is shipping is responsible for significant amounts of greenhouse gas emissions globally, and this will grow in the future as well, significantly. Now, whether shipping is the most environmentally form of transport, it is, but it also has a potential to actually do more, and hopefully with with innovation and with research, it will be able to do so, thus helping Arctic communities as well. The slide to your right actually presents some work that I've done personally. I've actually seen how the attitudes within the shipbuilding industry itself, by looking at news reports, by looking at annual reports of shipbuilders and ship owners, have actually changed over the past 20 years. And what we see is that there has been a change. There has been an environmental assessment that shipping is doing more and that can do more, such as we've seen from some previous examples as well. Now, within this context, Scotland is uniquely placed because it already has some more stringent environmental regulations imposed on shipping than perhaps some other places of the Arctic do. This is to do with the emission control areas that put targets on shipping emissions from sulfur oxides, and there are also other emission control areas or emission targets for nitrogen oxide emissions as well. In the future, we can expect more of these targets to be developed for the Arctic in particular and globally as well. There has been discussion within the International Maritime Organization about targets for a heavy fuel oil ban in the Arctic, and other targets within the Scottish Executive and within the UK government about talking about decarbonisation, which we've heard a lot about. So really understanding where does Scotland fit into all of this? How can Scotland actually use its potential to develop alternative fuels and alternative research programs to actually develop shipping that goes beyond the current fuels used? These would be principally heavy fuel oils, but looking at LNG, methanol, biofuels, and some of the examples we've seen previously, there is potential, some of which Scotland has tapped into already. Now, the Scottish Innovation in Sustainable Transport, we can use different types of potentials for alternative fuels. We have seen some examples of the great ferries that are running on LNG at the moment, some battery electric combinations as well, but there's also potential to tap into biofuel potential, electric hybrids, ferries, and so forth that can actually expand more on what's been done so far. And here the combination of using Scottish expertise, Scottish research clusters, with that what's been happening, a lot of my research primarily deals with Norway and Sweden, and seeing what's been done there, and actually seeing what can be learned from other Arctic and Nordic players is somewhere I think the potential really lies. Now, we can't talk about this without talking about shipbuilding and ship design. And here Scotland is definitely a place that has a long history of shipbuilding. Construction of the LNG ferries, as we've heard, within the Ferguson shipyard is somewhere that we can build upon and actually use expertise from other Arctic players and from Norway and Iceland to actually see how the shipyards can compete and build together with Arctic design companies as well. Now, we also can't go further without mentioning BAE Systems and naval shipbuilding, where there's a lot of expertise and research clusters that can be developed from a Navy perspective as well. I'd also like to mention the cruise ferry industry, ever so slightly, briefly, I mean, because we've seen more cruise ferries being developed in the Arctic. Scotland here could be a potential hub for actually the cruise industry when it goes up further north and when these cruise ships go around. And here, developing the cruise industry and developing more tourism has to be done in line with actually understanding what the environmental concerns are and how innovation can be used to tackle these concerns. And this brings us to one of my last points, and this is to do with Scottish ports. And what is the role of Scottish ports? I mean, we've heard a lot about this issue about whether there can be transshipment hubs of the north coast of Scotland for perhaps the development of the Northern Sea route. Now, we actually are fairly early on in these developments, but we can see that there is potential for Scottish ports to actually play a wider role in Arctic shipping and combine themselves with other Arctic stakeholders and players within the cruise industry, within the transport cargo industry, and within the ferry industry as well, to actually see how these ports can be developed, how their infrastructure can be developed, especially from the perspective of sustainable development and alternative fuels. Whether we develop bunkering infrastructure at a small-scale level for LNG or for biofuels at these types of ports, it can be the first step of developing Arctic shipping that's cleaner, more sustainable than it is now. And this is somewhere where Scotland can play a significant role. Now, where do we go from here, and how can we develop the issue that we have been looking at into the future? My research as a social scientist primarily deals with understanding people's perspectives, hopes, and articulations of visions for the future. And I've spoken to probably 50 people formally interviewed so far in my research for this specific research project I'm working on at the moment, but also had numerous hundreds of discussions with other people informally. And there are a couple of points that everyone mentions, and this is about to do with articulation of vision. When we were talking about the development of the LNG ferry industry in Norway, in some of my research looking at biofuel developments in Sweden, or looking at the Arctic in general, Scotland's role here can be someone who actually looks as a player, as a key stakeholder to develop the vision of what it wants to do with its shipping, how it can make its shipping more sustainable, and how it can move towards different types of alternatives. And here the creation of momentum is crucial. Only if we building together all the different Arctic stakeholders together, enacting regulations and promoting more stringent regulations, whilst at the same time allowing for the development of subsidies and allowing for the development of innovation clusters that can lead to these types of developments, Scotland can be a true player, a true Arctic player that develops its expertise of actually not only leading in decarbonization, but also developing decarbonization within shipping and developing alternatives within its northern ports and becoming a true Arctic player from a sustainability perspective. So I hope this would actually help the remote communities because they're the people who are most affected by these types of environmental concerns and these environmental changes as well. And this is something that I think we have to work more into the future, but we can actually do a lot in. Thank you so much.